To start by going back to one of your earliest successes, Rebills. You took it from zero to exit within only 24 months. It was one that kind of kickstarted your career as an entrepreneur. Tell me about Rebills. How did you go about, like, how did you come up with the idea? How did you found it? What's kind of like this founding story?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I didn't actually have the idea. My business partner, who's still my business partner today, had the idea. He came up with the idea by essentially being our day one customer. So he was trying to figure out how to run subscription offers on an e-commerce brand that he had. And through a ton of trial and error, essentially trying to figure out all these softwares that kind of existed in the market but didn't really have an entire solution all packaged in one. He figured out how to run it for himself. And through just the network, people would then start coming to him specifically and going, okay, can you do this for me? And almost Rebills was born out of that. There ended up being three of us together at the start um, to essentially like form it as an agency. So we were manually building these payment pages. We were manually building out this same flow that he had built in his own e-commerce brand, and it kickstarted as an agency from that. And eventually, obviously, we turned this into a software company and a SaaS solution, as doing it manually wasn't exactly scalable.
hmm Well, it's always been fascinating by how companies go from idea to growth. What was the kind of growth journey like? How are you guys? I know you said you're more on the kind of like the operations side, but how do you then like take something like now you know you've got some that the market needs, kind of validate a little bit. How do you grow from there? How did you grow Rebills?
Funnily enough, we grew Rebills nearly entirely off word of mouth. Um, I would say definitely in that company, marketing is something that we didn't exactly figure out. So we just focused on how do we make this product as good as possible? How do we make the experience of the users and clients we had on the software as good as possible? And that triggered a lot of referrals and word of mouth where people would come to us and go, it's a very small industry, or at least it's a small network of people. I've heard about you through X and X. Can you do the same for us? And we would get majority of our clients through that word of mouth referral system.
How did you like? Then you exited, and then you go on to become an investor. You started investing in a few startups. Tell me about those investments.
So those investments were super focused on. I had this idea of an ecosystem. Everything in your own ecosystem influences your current company and your clients' companies and everything that powers them. So we'd spent 2 years or so in the e-commerce B2B space, and the idea was to go out and make investments in the same industry that basically just served different types of offers or different products. Obviously, we'd exited this company. We couldn't stay doing the same thing. So it was, how do we go out and serve the industry that we were in and we built a name in, but with different products. So looking at the pain points that we'd had either ourselves or we'd seen that our clients had, and go out and try and figure out what companies are up and coming in that area and building cool products. Again, it was very SaaS and tech orientated because that's where we'd kind of finished in the end of that rebuilds journey. So I wanted to continue that piece as I thought we'd had a lot of learnings from it. And we went out and found those people. It was very network orientated. I feel like a lot of the people we partnered with, they weren't strangers to us. Like we'd heard of them or we'd heard of these softwares, etc. There was obviously new people that we did find, or they introduced us to new people. But it was a mission on going out to look at the current problems we knew existed and deploy that capital in a way that we could build some cool products.
Absolutely. Now you're kind of starting to look for these deals. You're scouting for companies that you can invest in. Obviously, there's lots of SaaS products out there, lots of different teams trying to build them. When you started to see deals come on come across your table, and you're evaluating them, what were some kind of like parameters or ways like frameworks you're using to say, I want to invest in this startup. This startup, maybe not so much.
Mm. I think it was always around the person and the founder or the team that was currently operating it. Ideally, the founder, because I think the founder always has a different incentive when growing the business than someone who maybe took it on at a later date. Um, Obviously, we'd look at all of the typical stuff, the finances, and we would do all those metrics to try and come up with valuations. But some of the companies we invested in were so early stage that coming up with any true valuation wasn't necessarily like a exact science. So we would do a lot of our due diligence and decision making around the people. Did we believe in the person who was running the project? Did we think we could see them continuing to run it for a long time and taking it through success? And I'd say that would inevitably be the end decision, like on whether we would pursue it or not. And a lot of the pitches we received, even if the product was incredible and we thought the market was big, if we didn't believe in the person, it would eventually pass.
You mentioned that part of believing in the founder was kind of seeing if they could be the one to complete this and to make it successful. I've heard that from quite a few investors, but I've always wondered, what does that look like in practice for you? So if you can, maybe talk about like one of the founders you met during those the investment process that you did, maybe at the funding, that really showed you that during your conversations. How does a founder show you that they're the one, they're the man to do it, or they're the woman to do it?
I think it's all around their personal characteristics, the way they talk about the company, the way they talk about the idea, the future, what their vision is. It needs to align with what your vision is as an investor. If your vision is to build for 2 years and exit, then their vision needs to be similar, build for an X amount of time and exit. If it's to build an ecosystem of companies, which is kind of what ours was, we need that long term vision. We need them to really be bought in with the idea of we're going to turn this into something big. We want long term vision. We want someone who can continue to iterate on the initial idea and and make it better and better and better to continue to serve an industry. So I think it was all about aligning vision and aligning expectations with what we had, and whether that's right or wrong is personal to us, but basically looking for those similarities in terms of vision, I'd say, was a big way for us of founders showing us that we'd be a good fit.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I believe you kind of bootstrapped Rebills for the most part, but now you're investing in companies and you're taking a bit of a more active role in that sense. Do you what differences kind of have you noticed in that transition? Would you say, like, now that you're thinking as an investor more than a founder, what are some maybe misconceptions founders have about the way investors think and operate?
Mm. I would say a lot of people look at investment as a necessity, and coming from bootstrapping a business, it most definitely isn't, unless you're trying to build rocket ships, which we're definitely not. I would say most businesses could go without the investment. And investment is a speed factor that accelerates the current vision. Um, but every business we invest in, ideally, not all the time, but ideally, should be able to be achieved without the investment. It just might take longer. And I think that puts you in a position where there's a healthy business model. You're not reliant on massive burn that could eventually run out if you don't hit these ideals. Um, and it also is a good way of validating the idea and the people that are running the idea, and do they have the skill sets required to take this to the next level. um, is it a deal breaker? No, I don't believe it is. But I think it's a good sign on, is this a deal that has a high likelihood of paying off or not.
Absolutely. I've always wondered because investors talk about this kind of idea that their capital adds speed to how fast the company can accomplish its goals. Do you think sometimes, maybe in your experience or in your observation, the speed kind of maybe sometimes hurts the business because it's built on a shaky foundation, or because they haven't really, tried building a sustainable business model? Like, it's some of these startups that take millions and millions of dollars in funding and can't monetize, and they go bust.
Yeah, I think that's all surrounded by these companies taking money for the wrong reasons. They take money and they deploy this money into areas where they're potentially not needing the money to be deployed, and they take on all these costs that again they could have gone without, and they don't focus on the things that actually are growing the business. And it's a risk, right? And it is a game where the investors play it because there's a big risk, which means there's a big reward. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there is that risk there. And for me, I would say I'm not in the same game as being like a VC or an investor that is looking for these 100x's, 1000x's. Like, I want to build cool products and I want to serve an industry, and obviously I want to make money while doing that. But I don't plan on any of my investments being losers, because I'm not going into it with that same mentality as a VC of just keep deploying, deploying, deploying. Um, so I think there's definitely a mistake that these companies that raise hundreds of millions of dollars make, and it's piling money into areas that isn't needed without proving that business model. And the reality is that a lot of them, and obviously I'm passionate about this being in the operations side of the business, a lot of the businesses don't have their operations set up in a way where they could sustain or even manage initial pieces of growth. Like, if most businesses, and we'll talk about some of the smaller ones, if most businesses had 1,000 new customers tomorrow, they would break. Um, so if you're raising the money outside of products, let's say, if you're raising the money to put behind marketing and sales, then the real question they should maybe ask themselves is, like, if they achieve everything they're trying to achieve in that marketing and sales effort, could they even handle the growth that they're seeking to achieve with that funding? And I would argue most of the time the answer is no. So they should probably focus on building that repeatable model, the operations that can sustain massive growth and really give the feedback on the numbers they're looking for. And they'll probably see that growth without even needing the investment in the first place.
Interesting. Now, something else I want to talk to you about is when you look at a lot of people's profile online, they kind of seem to have this linear career, right? They found the company, they grow it, they maybe exit, they get funding, then they go on, they invest. Like, when you look at your LinkedIn, that's a story, right? Oh, it's linear. This guy just became successful, but I'm sure it's anything but linear, anything but just a straight line of growth. People very rarely talk about those kind of downturns in their careers, or their failures, their horror stories sometimes. And so I love to tell those stories as much as the success story. So whether you've got them from investments you've made, or the founding story of Rebills, what are some of those stories of yours? The downturns, the failures, the terrible nights you couldn't sleep.
Yeah, there's a ton, right? It's not, you only see the winners. People don't show the losers as much. Um, we've made investments post rebuilds that haven't gone as well, or at least have taken longer to pay off than we would hope for. But even before, even during building rebuilds, there was often very late nights, super stressful moments. There was moments where um, in particular, one of our client lists got leaked at one point, and people were trying to contact our clients, and there was a lot of issues. This was prior to rebuilds, not specific on rebuilds, but we had a number of companies sort of in different areas, and sometimes things go wrong. People decide their vision has changed. I'd say nearly all of those problems stem from people specifically, and specifically around people changing their mind or having a different idea on where they want to take things. And that's why my focus now today is super on the people side of the business and trying to get that right as much as possible. operations, systems, processes come very easy to me. I think they're binary. Um, People are not so much.
Hmm. Reflecting back on, I know I kind of asked a variation of this, but if you can maybe talk about one founder that particularly stood out to you, that was the most memorable with their pitch, with the way they presented themselves, and what do you think made them so memorable or so pleasant, I guess, to be around and made you want to invest in them?
Yeah, let me think. Um, I would say, I would say actually, it's a company we invested in. We still own it in the portfolio today. It's a company called Ad360, and I remember very well that first call that we had, and just being completely blown away by knowledge. Like it wasn't even a pitch. I would say it was more of just a here's the knowledge I have. Here's how we're um, using that to our to service up what we're trying to do, to build what we're trying to build. And it was just a very strong, knowledgeable pitch. um, Obviously we have companies in the portfolio now where we're raising money ourselves, and I'm talking to investors quite frequently, and I'm trying to perfect the perfect pitch. And I still think it just comes down to really showing that knowledge and showing that you understand what you're trying to do, you know where you want to go, you know the tools you need to do it. The money accelerates this. The money is not a necessity, and that's what that pitch felt like to me. Um, and I later went on to meet. He wasn't actually original. He was one of the founders. I went on to meet the major shareholder after that, and I would say that that first conversation was what pivoted the entire negotiation and discussion going forward after that, because it was just pure. You're impressed, right? You're purely like um, impressed in what they're trying to do, impressed in the person behind it, or the people behind it after that, and you understand that they truly understand what they're trying to do, rather than they've fallen into something and they're learning as they go, which is most of us, right? All of us are learning as we go. We weren't born understanding how to operate in the industries that we're operating in, but we learn through experience and iterations of our own thought processes. And when you meet someone who's clearly been in an industry for a long enough time where they just understand it at its core, it becomes very impressive.
So, if I may, let's take you to that moment. So, you get told this app called App 360. The founders are coming in the pitches, or the founders coming in the pitches. You sit down, and the founder's right in front of you. Take me to that moment. What is he exactly saying to show you, like, I know my stuff? Like, because there's also a lot of people who are good at talking, but they don't really know what they're talking about. They just keep talking on and on. So what was it about what he was exactly saying? Like, take me to that moment.
The first ever meeting I had with them was a virtual meeting, and I'd more describe it as just a pure product demo. This is what we do. This is where we came from. This is where we're going, and just an uninterrupted knowledge dump at me. And I think that's where it was kind of like I'd been through a ton of pitches at that point. We were being pitched 2 or 3 times a day or for different products, different industries, etc. So we'd kind of like heard the typical pitch over and over and over again. And this just completely shifted that in terms of it wasn't at all about the pitch. It was about the product and the people. This is who we are. And I just remember sitting there. My right hand, Haley, she was on the call as well, and I think I remember texting her offline like, "Yeah, we're investing in this." Within about the first half an hour of the first call, we'd seen no financials. I knew no one else in the business. We'd practically just had a product demo. Um, But I think at that point there, we knew we were going to invest in the product, and the details were just details that needed to be handled after. But I was bought into the vision of, well, this is what it's going to achieve, and these are definitely the people to do it.
Hmm. At the risk of kind of repeating myself, like, so he's sharing his screen, he's showing this product, right?
Mm.
What is he? So, like you mentioned, within half an hour, you knew you want to invest. Let's like take like very specific. Like, what was that like? So, because a lot of founders they talk about them showing their product, but then it's like most investors are kind of like yawn. It's okay, good, like cool product, dude. Like, and then they don't always get the funding. So, was it to you the product that specifically said, or as you mentioned, kind of like the knowledge that he was talking about? If it's the knowledge, like what specific things was he saying that like made you go, "Wow, this guy knows his stuff"?
I think it was. I think it was like you said. Anyone can do a product demo, and they can go through this feature does this feature does this. But it was the talking of, this is why this was built. This is how this is built. This is what it does. This is how it does this different to how everyone else does it, and why it does it based on our thought process. And it was that understanding of, wait a second, like, this has been thought about. This is not just being built as a feature on an app. This is being built with a very specific purpose, and this person who's telling me it truly understands what it does from a technical aspect, from a commercial aspect, from like as a business. And I think that was truly impressive, um, to me. And just like I said, I'd had so many of those pictures of people going through their products, but no one had really like shown, well, this is why it matters. Like, this is what this does in the big picture, not a product. No one cares about an app. No one cares about a specific feature, but they care about what impact that has on an industry. And even I sat there the entire time thinking about the industry I'd just come from, and how could this be adapted to that, and how can it serve the people I know in my, and like immediately, like, you almost became a product advocate for it, because you saw the passion and understanding in someone else, and they truly were able to convey not why it mattered to them and their clients, but why it mattered to me and the bigger picture of an entire industry. And it's very difficult to explain that. It's very difficult to even learn that, I would say, for people wanting to learn how to pitch their products and pitch their businesses. I think you can't learn that. You have to go through what, like, within a pitch and within a product demo or whatever we want to call it. You could feel 10 years of doing. Or however long it had taken to get to that point, you could feel this person isn't talking from a theory standpoint. They're talking from a place of practical use cases, and they understand all the things that could go well, all the things that can not go so well, and what that means for them, what that means for clients, what that means for investors, what that means for an industry as a whole, and the impact that all of those people are going to feel. Um, and you become bought into that person, and know that, say there's a problem, because there's always going to be problems, they'll figure out a way to fix it.
Ah, interesting. So it's kind of like the Y Combinator model of talk to your users, then go code, talk to your users, then go code. The founder, it's like, at least the impression I'm getting is they had really done the talking to their users part, and they really understood the need well. And because of that, every single feature, every single bit of the product was intentional, and there was a reason behind it because of all the talking they had done to the. Am I kind of getting that part right?
Yeah, I would say that's fair to say. They've done enough of that. They've done enough of the company. Not to give a history on the company, but the company had like originated as a research lab. So like originally, it wasn't even. It was built purely to. It was science, and you get bought into this story of where a product has evolved from, what it's what it's gone through to become where it is today. And that takes talking to customers, that takes doing extensive research, that takes spending hours or days and weeks and months upon coding and getting things wrong and going through the pain. We have like a little inside joke between my friends and our business partners that like a lot of business is just reps, and the more reps you do and the more pain you feel, the better things get. And like you could just feel that. You could feel that during the pitch, and you could feel that during the stories he was telling, and it was a story.
Interesting. Now, last question I got for you is: you've got a school community where you're kind of giving back to a lot of the younger generation that wants to learn from you and follow in your path. Tell me about that a little bit and what you do there.
So the school community for me is one of the biggest problems I have in business right now is talent acquisition. I want like, finding good people, people who are going to be around for a long time. So for me, it was about giving some knowledge back, going, okay, this is my learnings. Here's the things I've understood and been through, and how I can pass that on. And how do I turn people into great operators where I can potentially partner with them. They can potentially come and work in some of our businesses if they don't have their own ideas. Like, not every great businessman is necessarily a entrepreneur. They might be intrapreneurs, I think they call it now, where they can come and work in bigger operations. And part of the school community was that for me. It was okay. I can give this value. I can help, and it's no cost off my back to do that. But the upside for me is massive in the fact of I can find these great entrepreneurs which are just starting. Maybe they have the ideas. Maybe they are great product people, great marketing people, but they don't necessarily how to build the operations of a company that is really truly set to scale. And for me, we do that in our sleep. So it's like, yeah, I can do this. I can educate people on that, and it's going to again the same reason of being in Dubai, be in the room, meet great people. The school community for me is that at scale eventually, where there's so many people in this community who are all trying to work towards something different. I'm giving them my knowledge in terms of what I know to do. In return, I'm sure I'll get knowledge on what they know how to do.
Interesting. Like one last question on that. So you mentioned talent acquisition, developing kind of your own talent with this community. When Alex Sermozy invested in school, his thesis was that education was changing, and this was one of the companies that would contribute to the future, the new education model. If you're
Mhm.
someone who wants to be a founder or who wants to build companies, is school generally still like, do you think college is a good idea? Do you think going to college, finishing it up, do you think that's important, especially like when you make investing decisions? Does that matter to you? Do you look at a founder's education and go, this guy has a degree from Stanford, I'm gonna invest, this guy doesn't? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
No, I don't look at it at all. If I'm being honest, unless it's at the absolute highest level, um, it's not something I'm generally interested in. I think education is changing massively. I was one of those guys that grew up watching YouTube. Like, if I don't know how to do something, the first thing I'm doing is going to YouTube. And even now, that probably changes. The first thing you do is go to ChatGPT. How do you do X and X? It spits out a ton of resources. Like, I think education is changing to a lot of self education. You can go out, it's so easy to find the resources, be pointed in the right direction, and then it's just consumption. Um, and education, similar to the way content is going, is going more short form, becoming easier to digest. How can I get the most information in the shortest or smallest package where it's easily digestible and I can get to my conclusion as quick as possible? Um, and a 4 year, 5 year college course probably just isn't of much interest to people anymore. Or a university. I didn't go to university. I left school at 18. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in business, and going to university and doing a course that I wasn't necessarily interested in, which I think is what most people do, had no appeal. So unless there's a very specific career path that you want to go down, you know where you want to go, you know that you need the qualifications to do it, like let's say a doctor or something. It's probably not best to be learning how to be a doctor on YouTube. Um, then I understand university and I understand those traditional education courses. if you want to learn how to be a web developer or something that is purely just knowledge based with no necessarily uh, no practical examinations needing to be done, then I think absolutely like education is changing, school, short form content, long form content, like there's no reason to need to go through a long, extensive, specific. I think the time specific thing is what's going to change the most. If I can go through a curriculum in a week, why should I not be able to? And self teach rather than be put through a 4 or 5 year program with an end exam at the end.
Absolutely.